In this episode of the Keep Growing podcast, we're going to defrost, venture outside, and get to work in the garden. At the time of recording, it's early April here in the Mid-Ohio Valley. While we're having some warmer days, the danger of frost, freezes, and even snow are still lurking about. However, that doesn't mean you need to cower indoors and wait for warmer weather. There are plenty of spring gardening tasks that can be done right now. Here are some tips to help you get started. Clean up your garden beds. There are quite a few areas in my landscape where I leave dead growth from the previous year during the winter. It can create some structural interest, but also in my meadow garden, the thick brush left by the wildflowers provides shelter for small animals and birds. In January or February, the really thick brush makes a nice bonfire. However, I save the flower beds until the weather gets a bit warmer. Start by cleaning up any dead leaves, branches, and other debris that may have accumulated over the winter. This can help prevent diseases and pests from taking hold. Up next, add compost. During the winter, activity in your compost pile slows down, bacteria go dormant, and worms retreat downward to find warmth. Now that the weather is warming up, your compost pile is becoming more active. Now is a good time to harvest finished compost from the bottom of your pile and give your pile a turn. You can also resume adding browns to the pile, like the leaves and other plant debris from your garden. Adding that finished compost to your garden beds will help improve soil health and fertility. Spread a layer of compost over your garden beds and work it into the soil. Till your garden. If you grow a traditional victory-style garden with straight rows, now is the time to till. I have a section of my garden where I grow row crops like corn and beans. I'll till it a couple of times in the spring. The first time is to till under my cover crop and any plant debris from last summer. And then I'll till it again just before planting to get a nice fluffy texture. It's also an excellent time to till up flower beds in preparation for summer annuals, wildflower seeds, etc. I'll also try to add a few new garden beds each year. As I slowly grow my meadow garden, I'm also trying to get it a bit more organized in some places. This year, at the entrance to the front path, I'm planning on adding a planting of zinnias that I can also cut to bring some color inside. And I also have a spot where I want to introduce some native grass seeds. Plant cool season crops. Early spring is the perfect time to plant cool season crops like cabbage, lettuce, spinach, kale, and peas. These crops can tolerate cooler temperatures and will grow well in the early spring. You can also use row covers to help protect early seedlings. I do this with two of my favorite crops that I direct seed in late March: black-seeded Simpson leaf lettuce and spinach. Both of these need some protection while they sprout, but they also can't take the warmer temperatures in May. They will bolt super early if the weather is warm. Bolting is what happens when cool weather crops start to bloom and produce seed. New growth will shoot up seemingly overnight, and the plant's sap will turn white and bitter, which isn't exactly great for vegetables. Also, don't be afraid if your early spring transplants like cabbage, kale, and other brassicas take some frost damage. The outer leaves might get a bit burnt and discolored, but new growth will come in stronger than ever. I've seen cabbage get covered in snow and keep going like it was nothing. Start seeds indoors. If you want to get a head start on your gardening, consider starting seeds indoors. This is a great way to get a jump start on the growing season and ensure that your plants are ready to go when it's time to transplant them outside. However, if you're a new gardener, this can be a bit tricky. There are a few things to consider like lighting, watering, and also timing. Timing is huge. I know we all start getting the itch to plant some seeds in March, but if you start too early, you might end up with overgrown, tall, spindly, root-bound plants. I've been there plenty of times. This is also where your own experience comes in as far as what plants you're good at starting from seed versus what you might want to buy from a garden center. For example, I know I'm not that great at starting peppers. I always buy my starts from Bob's. The benefit of growing seeds is that you might be able to find unique seeds that you can't find as starts. There's hundreds of different varieties of tomatoes, and a common question I get this time of year is, why doesn't Bob's grow tomato X? Well, that can be a complicated answer. It can be anything from licensing agreements with the plant breeders to the fact that maybe that variety just didn't sell well in the past. Prune your trees and shrubs. At the time of releasing this episode, we're kind of past the time for pruning fruit trees here in the Mid-Ohio Valley, but early spring is also a good time to prune your trees and shrubs. This will help encourage healthy growth and prevent any potential diseases, pest problems. Mulch your garden beds. Mulching your garden beds will help retain moisture and regulate soil temperature. There are quite a few options for mulch, from pine bark to cypress, straw for veggie garden beds, and many other choices. Now, this is personal taste, but I'm not a fan of weed cloth and stone, unless it's in an area of your landscape where you're planning on not to plant. More often than not, weeds will start growing through the weed cloth, and it just creates a huge mess. If I'm growing a landscape bed, I prefer not to use weed cloth because I like to slowly incorporate old mulch into the soil where it can break down over time and act as a soil amendment. Ultimately, mulching will help ensure that your plants stay healthy and happy throughout the growing season. Finally, keep an eye on the weather. While early spring can bring warmer temperatures, it can also bring frost and unexpected snowstorms, and windstorms this spring. Keep an eye out on the weather forecast and be prepared to protect your plants if necessary. Once we get our summer annuals available at our market locations, I'll post frost and freeze warnings for those last stubborn cold snaps. You can also get them through your weather app on your phone if you're not local to our area. Although the unpredictability of the weather can make spring gardening a challenge, there's just something about getting outside on warm days and getting your hands dirty. I have a bit of seasonal affective disorder, so the short days of winter can really get me down. This is the time of year where I feel like I can get back outside and keep growing. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Keep Growing podcast. I got an email the other day. It turns out we're the #1 ranked home and garden podcast in Mongolia. Next time, we'll have our last bi-weekly episode until next winter. We're going to take a look at collecting and pressing plant specimens. Then, this summer, we're going to continue the podcast with a new episode each month. During that time, be sure to check out our show, Bob's Live, on Facebook and YouTube every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Also, on most Thursdays, We're now going to be going live on Instagram from various places like my garden, the greenhouse, our market locations, and other awesome destinations. As always, you can learn more about Bob's Market at bobsmarket.com. If you like the podcast, go ahead and give us a subscribe and make sure you give us a review. That definitely helps so we're number one in more places than Mongolia. Until next time, once again, keep growing. Copyright 2023, Bob's Market and Greenhouses, Incorporated.